Good evening. This is the meeting of the Plymouth Charter Commission from the Great Hall in the Town Hall in Plymouth. This meeting is hybrid, meaning it's in person as well as via a Zoom webinar and can be viewed live on the local government channel 15 Comcast and 47 Verizon. This meeting is being recorded. The Zoom attendees must register using the Zoom webinar link on the Charter Commission page of the town website. And Zoom attendees, for public comment, please use the raise hand icon on the lower portion of your screen. At any in-person public comment, use the podium and place your name on the sign-in sheet. Thank you, and we'll begin with a Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So welcome to our Collins attendees tonight. I see Libby up on the screen. So we have a number of things to get through tonight. We're in the section on the Select Board, which is Chapter 3. And then we also are dealing with the Planning Board, also in that chapter. We should probably conclude that chapter tonight. And just to tell you where we are, we have a draft of the charter through our meeting on July 11th. And it's been sent to you by email. The changes should appear in red from our existing charter. We were entering changes this afternoon to be sure that they showed up. And between now and our meeting on August 8th, which is our next meeting, Monday, August 8th, we will complete entering the changes to date that this commission has at least tentatively adopted. So please read them, see if there's any corrections. If you want to go back and do a redo on any of them. And we're proceeding through the charter. On August 8th, we will be discussing the charter enforcement, and we've had a number of possibilities for enforcing the charter. So that'll definitely be on the agenda for that meeting. So I'd like to start tonight with something we started a couple of weeks ago and didn't finish, which was a discussion of how the Plymouth Select Board would be elected. And you recall we had basically two issues there. One was the number of select board members, and we talked about five or seven, and then how they would be selected and what representing what geographic areas. We took some tentative votes at the last meeting, but I think by now everyone's had a chance to perhaps consider it further. Would anybody like to engage in any discussion? And then we'll take a couple of votes and see if we have enough to proceed with a change in the select board format. Any discussion? Mr. Pfizer.
Had a meeting with a member of the select board bringing up this very topic, and the select board member was adamant. Select board members, the purpose of the select board members is to represent Plymouth as opposed to representing portions of Plymouth. I think that there has been discussion by some members of this commission that people don't feel as though they're connected to the select board. There are ways of doing that, but I believe that it is not appropriate to have the way to have ward politics, to have people representing not Plymouth, but representing specific parts of Plymouth. The second question that came up with the select board, and this is a person who has been working as a member, was the number. And this member of the select board could not fathom how having more members would improve either the representation or the working of the select board. My feeling strongly stated is that we have the larger, with one exception of the 310 towns in Massachusetts, we have the largest number of select board members, 5. We should stay with that, and we should stay with the method of electing them, which is all 5 at large in various elections, 2, 2, and 1. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Mr. Bill Cohan.
I had a similar conversation with the same select board member who had the same reservations that you outlined, but I did propose a compromise to this concept. One, we all agree that Plymouth, we're all in this together, and the town of Plymouth should have a board that is focused on the entire town of Plymouth, all of the trials and tribulations, and we've had that consistently for many years. But over a period of time, Plymouth has now grown to nearly 70, 80,000 people. And I often hear in my efforts around the town, North Plymouth is left out of the equation. Manomet is like the little red stepchild. Cedarville is not included. I think we have to recognize that there are growing demographics and concerns. The concerns in North Plymouth are different from the concerns of Cedarville. What I say is we stay to the current number of Board of Selectmen, 5 members, still elected at large across the town. A supermajority of people focused on the issues of Plymouth as a whole. But at the same time, we adjust to this reality of this population growth and these concerns by having 2 additional selectmen. 1 selectman representing 9 precincts in the north, and 1 select person representing 9 precincts in the south. You'd end up with 7, which is what you need. It is a recognition of that frustration by the people in different parts of Plymouth not having someone to voice their concerns, but not any one part of Plymouth having a majority to overrule the priority, and that is the town of Plymouth. I think that might be a compromise to the growing attributes to Plymouth.
Thank you, Bill. What are the 2 specific areas the additional 2 selectmen represent?
What I would have is there's 18 precincts in Plymouth. Neatly, it adds up to 9 and 9, so you'd have 1 precinct, 1 selectman represent, 1 select person from the 9 in the north, and then 9 in the south.
Right.
Or maybe it might be northern coastal or west and
But
south.
all 18 precincts would be covered.
Yep.
Mr. Chairman?
Okay, further discussion. David Malaguti.
Well, I am just as adamant that we stay at 5, and the Collins team has found no other place outside of Wakefield, which has 7 members elected at large. However, they have since renamed their select board as town council. I believe 5 is the way we should go. I don't believe we should have these 2 other added people, one, covering the north, one covering the south. We should stay with 5, and if you want more community representation and you want more activities, let's say, at the local level, then we should strengthen the committee of precinct chairs to further that goal. I do not see for the life of me why we need 2 elected selectmen, and I base that opinion on the fact that I sat in that seat for 22 years, and I see no need for 2 other added members.
Thank you. Betsy Hall.
Thank you, everybody. We've all had so much time to think about this, and I've also been checking with residents. I've had residents tell me very strongly they think we should have 9. I've had residents tell me very strongly they think we should have 7, and others who said they thought 5 was fine. And as far as some people thought the at-large thing, the district thing was fine, other people made them nervous. My own personal thoughts on it are, first of all, we're a committee of 9. I'm not suggesting that we should have a select board of 9, but 9 people do manage to meet together. And I'm thinking 7 would be helpful because I'm thinking about the number of people, in fact, a selectman who just left us, who said it's a huge job. There's a lot to do. And they leave because they might be great selectmen and they might be quite dedicated to the town, but they find the job too much. And so I think maybe if we had 7 selectmen for a town the size of ours, that would be, and I would not suggest that we divide the town, that we just have 7 at large. So I think that I don't want to see us lose good selectmen who care about the town because they find the job overwhelming. Now, I know that, I think David served on the Roads Advisory Committee, didn't you, David, as a selectman? And selectmen serve on other boards and committees, so they have a lot of responsibilities. And I think actually the suggestion that we take licensing and put it to a different committee or something might give select board less, might be less trouble, less time consuming. I've even seen on Facebook, one of our select boards bemoaning how much work it is to be a selectman. So I think if we could spread that a little wider, people can meet in groups of 7. I think boards of giant corporations have 30 people on them, and they manage to do that. They manage to meet and make sense. I think our select board of 7, and there's an old wonderful Shakespeare thing that says a rose is still a rose no matter what you call it, although I'm not quoting it exactly correctly, but whatever we call this, the duties will be of a select board. And I think we can call it a select board, it'll be a select board, and I think, as you know, I'm quite dedicated to keeping town meeting and keeping a select board, but I think making the job less strenuous, less onerous, less time-consuming would benefit the town, and we would not lose really good select board members because they just don't have time for it. Thank you.
So Betsy, your recommendation was 7?
I think 7 at large
Okay, 7.
would
Got it.
help the
Thank
town.
you. Frank Mann?
So first of all, I want to say how enjoyable I find it that we have a different opinion of every member of this charter. I think that speaks well of our integrity and our different unique perspectives. So I'm going to add 24, no, I'm going to add another iteration. I can't remember if I was the one that initially proposed this, but my initial idea, tempered to a degree, is that we have 7 select board members and that 3 of them, representing 6 precincts each, are regional, essentially coastal, west, and southern. And I think there are many, many reasons. I think I don't accept the notion that there's no fathomable reason. As Betsy just said, one of the clear reasons of many of the changes we're making is to accommodate the growth of the community, the changes that has happened, the population increases, and what is very clearly a disenfranchisement, at least in the opinion or feelings of our town residents, that in regard to their fair share or their participation. I think there's no other reason for the low turnout we see in the farthest reaches in the southern portion and what used to be Precinct 9, and that they feel disconnected, that they feel more connected maybe to the Cape, and we need to do more. And this, yes, there are other things we can do, we should do, and hopefully we will do, but this is one step in that direction of making people part. Yes, they do represent the entire community, as we expect our town meeting representatives to maybe give voice to their residents' concerns, but ultimately vote in the spirit of the community. And this is what we would expect of all select board members, regardless of where they were elected from or where they... I think this is maybe just a token to give to residents, but it's one that they would appreciate amongst other things that we would do. Also, I think it would be significant for this board to take as many dramatic and clear changes and actions that we can to let people know we're serious. I think people are going to question the seriousness of this committee in terms of, we've been accused from the beginning of being status quo, of people that only wanted to keep things the way they are. I don't think any of us want to keep things the way they are, but I think this is one clear sign and symbol that we do want to move forward and have the community's government represent a changing community as much as possible. I love town meeting, I love our form of government, but that doesn't mean I believe it's written in stone. It's not passed down to us from Moses. This is something that has evolved and should evolve, and I think this is one important evolution that we could make.
Thank you, Frank. Wrestling. Wrestling Brewster?
Yeah, I again applaud Frank for, the differences of opinion, that's why we're here. Firstly, we have tried to make some drastic changes in the legislative branch. And, giving more responsibility to precinct chair is giving more responsibility to the legislative branch. We really need to look at the executive branch. And I think to piggyback on what Frank was saying is that's what the public is very disenfranchised against their government. And why we created this commission is because people were not happy. They didn't feel that they were represented. I think a couple more selectmen would be a good idea. I go back and forth on electing from different parts. I don't think it's a good idea to have 3 general elected and then 2 elected from 9 and 9. I think that is way too confusing. But I do think that 7 would be a better number. And I think that it's, as Frank kept saying, we're going to show these people that we're, like we've said from the beginning, we want to put this on the operating table. We don't want to just say minor tweaks here and there. And I think we need to take a hard look at the executive branch. And if we keep it at 5 and we keep it general elected, I ask you, what changes have we made to the executive branch? So I'd be in favor of 7, and I'm not really sure how they get elected, but I'd definitely be in favor of 7.
Thank you, Wrestling. Any other? David Peck?
Both Frank and Wrestling, said what I was going to say, where, I see our election as a commission was people expecting some transformational changes and not nibbling at the edges. I also then and now remain, of the belief that someday a council is coming to Plymouth, and it's, looks like it's not this group, but I welcome changes that are sort of transitional to a future council. So I am in support of 7. I actually, philosophically, I like the idea of the 9. Of course, then people said, wait a minute, that certainly looks like a council, because many councils are 9 people. But I'm certainly in support of 7. I also like the idea of some degree of regionality and control. Again, in this broader, what I see is the direction that this town is taking, heading toward, if not this time, in the future toward a council. And it would be, again, a bolder step than just maintaining the 5 at large. So I'm in support of 7, and I like the idea of some degree of clustering districts for representation.
Thank you. Any other comment? I would just like to add that we shouldn't make any assumptions on how long this commission work product is going to stay current. And charter, we had similar discussions, I know, 22 years ago. And the way towns, and certainly this town, moves on charter reform, it could be many, many years in effect before we again tackle a question of a charter. You heard the Collins folks tell us at the beginning that ours is the only active, really, charter commission functioning in the state at the moment, because it's a big process. First, to get it on the ballot with thousands and thousands of signatures, go through the whole election procedure. I mean, it's a very complicated and difficult project to get off the ground. So I think whatever we do in our charter, it's got to be looked at as certainly a semi-permanent change, not a transition. At least that would be I think the assumption. Further comment, Dave, Bill?
I just want to piggyback on what Frank said. I think that it does work out neatly where you have 3 serving in the community, representing different parts of Plymouth, north, south, west. I think that's important, but we still want to maintain a supermajority of people that are represented as throughout the town at large. So I like what Frank has to say. I was proposing that so the board would stay wrestling at 7 at all times, where you would have 4 at large, and then the 5th and the 6th and the 7th select person would represent a section of Plymouth. And I was proposing 2, but that might be a lot to clump into that idea. Am I really trying to create an atmosphere where a selectman is coming from a part of Plymouth that might increase voter turnout if you know that there's someone that's going to serve on the board that's coming in from this angle? I think those things are important too. Anything we can get turnout and people to be more engaged in with their government, I think I would gravitate towards Frank's proposal.
Okay, we've heard a range of views from number of select board members and areas of town they represent.
I just wanted to say that sometimes it might be better for us to look at steps. In other words, if we as a board decide, as a commission decide to move to 7, to have a future commission, if they would like to, or charter review committee, look at regionalizing it. Maybe start with the 7, that's a big shift, and then down the road, see if regionalizing it is something that would benefit, see how, because some of the 7 might be elected from other parts of town that already get represented by having 7. So I'm going to move that we have 7 selectmen elected at large.
Okay, so, yes, Bill?
So are you making some sort of motion?
I think I made it as a motion, I said
Okay.
I moved, but we need a second
So
before
let's-
we
can
discuss
either
it.
Because I
have-
just
Does
wanted to
anyone
say,
want to
I just
second
wanted
it?
to make it clear that the only reason I would go from 5 selectmen to 6 and 7 is if they had this regionalization. I couldn't just go increase the board and just have more selectmen at large. So I'm firm on that idea. The reason I'd expand the board is to give this identification to different parts of Plymouth to feel included in the more regionalized discussions.
Okay. Before we ask for motions, I'd
Scott
like to
wants
hear
to
from
speak.
Scott. Decky, he hasn't spoken yet.
I don't want to reiterate what everybody else has been saying, but I would make a suggestion on the motion. Why don't we bite this into smaller pieces? Could we, if instead of a motion for 7 at large, I'd ask for reconsideration on a motion for just 7, and then let's go back into our discussion of whether how we want that divided up. I think it would just make a lot more sense. I think more people would be on board if we took it in smaller pieces.
Okay, thank you for your suggestion. Any further comment? Then we'll see if we can, then we'll decide how we're going to decide this, and then we'll try to fashion a motion. Any further comment? Okay, is it the desire of the commission to split this basically into 2 separate issues, the number of select board members and then what they represent, or to try to fashion a motion where we combine the makeup and information of the select board all in one motion? So all those who would like to separate out and simply vote on the number of select board members to start with, please raise your hand. That's one, so, one, hands are up over there or down? They're popping up and down.
Can we discuss the motion? Can we
This is
discuss
just on the number of select board
No,
members.
but, I know, but can we discuss the motion? It's one, who seconded it, and can we discuss
There's
it?
no second yet on the motion that I
Okay.
made.
Okay, there was no second on that, and I'd like to discuss the motion if we get a second.
Go ahead.
Okay, do we have a second?
Is the motion seconded?
Okay.
Seconded.
All right. So again, I would, just to have, I think the 2 are interconnected. I mean, the number, if we're going to go from 5, 6, 7 selectmen, we're going to add more selectmen. I think that the regionalization is part of my rationale. I wouldn't just be, adding more selectmen, or select persons, men or women. So I just, rather than break it apart, I don't see why we have to break it apart, because then if we break it apart, we're locked in. If we vote for the breaking it apart, then we're kind of locked into this idea that we're just increasing the Board of Selectmen if the regionalization part doesn't go with it. So I just
Okay, so we
prefer to
heard
keep them together.
Bill's argument for why he would like to combine it into one motion. Let's just see once again, how many would like to first decide on the number of select board members? The number. Please raise your hand again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's a majority. So that, the first motion will be as to the number of select board members.
Bill, I have a motion on the floor. However, I accept Scott's amendment to divide the motion to,
The
number.
the motion did not carry.
or I
the
can,
motion
I
carried
can
to
rescind my
first
motion.
Choose the number of select
Would that be
board
better?
members.
I take my motion back.
Is there a motion on number of select board members?
Yes, I move that we have 7 select board members.
Is that seconded? So it's moved and seconded that we have 7 select board members. Any discussion?
Can we do, yes. So if we vote now,
Bill?
if we vote now, we're voting for 7 selectmen
Yes.
to change the charter without really identifying what their role will be.
Bill, I think that we're going to vote how many selectmen we want.
Yep.
And then we can have a discussion to create a motion about how they get elected, whether they're regional or not.
But
Exactly.
if that possibility doesn't occur, then we just have 7 new selectmen, correct?
Maybe that's something that some of the charter members want.
Bill, if we can't decide how they're going to be elected, then somebody can move to go back to 5 members. But at the moment, we've decided that we're going to have 7. Now we're waiting for suggestions on how the 7 will be elected.
Well,
We didn't vote on the 7 yet.
we haven't voted on the 7. We have a first and a second. We're in the discussion of 7 members.
So is there a motion how many members we should have?
No, Mr. Chair, I believe we have a motion to have 7. We have a second.
Right.
We're in the discussion of that motion. So once you call the vote, we'll have a vote on whether to have 7 or not.
Is there any further discussion on the number of select board members, which the motion's having, which would set it at 7? All in favor of the motion to have 7 select board members? So I count 4 votes. All opposed to that motion?
You're voting against?
So it looks like 1, 2, 3. Did somebody not vote?
I think you missed a hand.
Bill, did you vote?
So I'm voting no unless I have some.
So, once again, in favor of 7 select board members, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the motion is in favor of having 7 select board members. The next vote and discussion will be on how the 7 members will represent the town. Is there a suggestion or a motion to be made as to
Mr.
how they will
Chairman,
represent the town?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make the motion that we have 4 at large, 3 that represent 3 regions of the town evenly divided
So Frank
precincts.
moves that 4 of them will be at large and 3 of them will be regional,
Yes.
and basically 6 precincts apiece.
We need to detail that, where they'd be represented, but that's the general
Right.
motion.
4 at large and 3 regional select board members. That's your suggestion? Discussion?
I'll second
Could I
that.
make-
I'll
could I
second that.
Could, this would be
Yes, go
a
ahead.
friendly amendment. If you look at the present, and we're not only thinking of the present design of Plymouth's precincts, there's no way that we can determine north, south, east, west. We can, I don't know if we can make suggestions, but I think the best we can do is to say 6 precincts each. I'm not sure we can even do that because theoretically, this charter is going to go beyond 2030. I mean, there's no end date to the charter. So I understand what Frank is working on, but I'm not sure that that we also haven't determined who's going to design the precincts, but somehow we're going to have to figure out who's going to design them, and are we just saying 6 precincts, 6 precincts, and 6 precincts?
Well, I think that they wanted, Larry, just your friendly amendment, is it an argument against it, or is it a suggestion of how to correct that problem that you see? Because right now, what Frank is suggesting, and what I've seconded, is that we'd add we would have, add 2 more selectmen to the 5, and then have 3 regionalized, equally proportioned between the current 18 precincts.
No, I understand,
Did you
I
have
understand what
did
you're
you saw
saying.
something
What I'm-
better?
With the way Frank
Yeah.
expressed it,
Yeah.
he was talking about regions of town,
Right.
which is a good goal.
Right.
But if you look at precincts 17 and 18 in particular, they're north-south precincts and quite long. And to try to say that, you know, if this is South Plymouth, I'm not sure that we can make a statement that they represent specific regions of
I
Plymouth.
think we're going to have to look at that. I mean, I think a number of us were on the precinct reorganizational task force that they put together, the working group. And yes, there are precincts that were focused. We did focus on the south, we did focus on the north, and we did focus on coastal areas and western areas. So the precincts are aligned to that possibility.
Scott?
Excuse me. I was actually more in favor of Billy's original motion. I think the Pine Hills have always been the geographical divider in town. I mean, granted, I'm not quite as aged as some members of the board, but I can remember when you didn't go to Manamet unless you had a reason, when you packed a lunch. So, I mean, I was more of a favor of Billy's original motion, which is 1 north, 1 south, just because of that, you know, the institutional knowledge, historic context of the Pine Hills being a divider. And if we're really looking for people that are going to focus on one end of town, I mean, that's just how town's always been split up. That's just my 2 cents.
Mr. Chairman, in some ways, I think we've prepared for this in that we spent a good deal of time talking about the committee that would review any possible precinct changes going forward. That same committee could address this. This is a long process, and if we incorporated that into this, we could have that determined by the community itself, not preordain how that should be. I myself think it wouldn't be, well, I shouldn't say it's a difficult process, but I do think that we can set it up so that the community itself, which is again an empowering aspect, could determine how that division occurs.
So Frank, you're suggesting the re-precincting committee would do this?
Yes.
We talked about, okay.
Adjust in the future.
Further discussion. So
Libby looks like she's...
Libby from Collins Group. Go ahead.
Good evening. Thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. I just wanted to jump in with just a separate type of concern. This commission has talked a little bit about re-precincting, and I'm wondering if you were to re-precinct, or you did need to add precincts to Plymouth, would you always have to add them in groups of 3, or how would your regionalization plan impact re-precincting in the future if it's needed?
Bill's suggestion?
Yeah, so earlier in the charter, we had discussed this at length, and we came to the conclusion that, you know, on the 10-year census is when we're going to do the precinct change, but we did call for a working group to be appointed in advance of that to begin the process. But obviously, every 10 years, we're going to have to acquiesce to the growth of Plymouth and how these precincts, how we go from 18 and 19 or 20, or whatever we go to in the future. The thought that I think that Frank was proposing is that that entity that gets set up to deal with that issue 10 years down the road, they can look at what the final result of precincts will be and whether or not they have to adjust them to show an equal portion of representation with these members who are regionalized. I think it would be something that they would have to suggest at that time. So I guess the big struggle will be every 10 years when the census come out, how do we maintain that equilibrium between these select persons that have been identified to represent a region?
Indeed, and the composition of precincts is controlled by state law. And there's some specific rules around that. So I just wanted the commission, excuse me, before they make a decision, to be aware of that might be an issue going forward, keeping an equal number of districts per regional selectman if you have to re-precinct in the future. I'm not sure if this is something, since the commission seems inclined to go with 7 select board members, if this issue, along with how you're dividing the town, might be something that you move to a study committee to further consider the impact of regionalization on the select board. That's certainly something that you can do. I think Ms. Hall might have suggested that as well, but that is an option to work out some of these intricate issues and the impact that they might have going forward on the town and in the composition of the select board.
We're always going to have to acquiesce to state law on the precincts, because they decide on the precincts, so that's good to note. But this entity that was set up could make that adjustment on our local level when the state makes its final decision on what precincts we'll have and what they'll look like.
Okay, we have a suggestion on the table, which is to have the select board consist of 5 members, 4 of them elected at large and 3 by regions.
7 members.
7 members, 4 and 3.
Right.
And is there another composition of the 7 that anyone else would like to suggest besides 4 and 3? David?
Yes, one of my colleagues said it, 5 and 2. Going back to Bill's original concept of 5 at large, 2 regional.
Okay, wrestling?
Don't we also have a bunch of villages? I'm just wondering, just throwing stuff out there, if instead of precincts, we went by zones. I'm just a suggestion, Larry.
Yeah, that would screw things up at the ballot box. Yeah.
Guess that's a no.
Because then you'd have people coming in and they'd be voting differently, based on their streets.
Okay, further discussion on that? Betsy?
Yeah, after hearing all of this discussion, I still am for 7 at large.
7 at large.
7 at large, yep. And
Okay, does somebody want to then make a motion, see if we have 5 votes for a proposition that splits the 7 in some manner?
Okay, well, I will start with the motion that we have 5 at large, 2 regional.
5 at large, 2 regional, seconded?
I'll second it.
Who seconded it?
Scott?
Oh, Scott, okay. Any further discussion on David Peck's motion? Okay, all in favor of David's motion, which is to have 7 select board members, 5 of them at large, and 2 of them regionally elected. All in favor? Let's see, looks like 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All opposed? 1, 2, 3, so it's 5 to 8 in David's motion. I guess, Scott, which way did you vote?
Yes.
Yes, I think it's 6 to 3, and David's motion passes.
No, I think it's 5
Let's
to
take that
4.
vote again. Let's take the vote again. I got confused.
Well, it's hard to tell what's going on at this end of the
I'll
table.
report. We'll do it again.
How many in favor of David's motion, which is to have 7 members, 5 of them elected at large, and 2 of them regionally? Raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'll vote. Makes 5. All opposed? 3. Scott, again, where were you?
No, Scott's.
Okay.
So Frank is voting.
Is that 5 to 4?
Yep.
Got it. Okay, so that's great. That's decided. Thank you. In the select board section, I just want to mention a few of the things we've already decided and tell you where they are in the select board.
Oh,
Larry?
at some point, and today is as good a day as any, we have to determine who's going to make this design. I mean, it's not magical, and we know from the state's work that dividing Plymouth is not a simple matter. I
Okay, but we-
understand, I think Scott was the one who said that the Pine Hills was the traditional dividing line, but many of the precincts go over the Pine Hills this time, and someone's going to have to say where, you know, which precincts go into which district. and
So
we
Larry,
can't-
I thought the suggestion was the re-precincting committee would become
Yeah,
involved.
So,
There isn't a re-precincting committee. I mean, really, the re-precincting committee, that's a pretty powerful operation. And the
basically-
re-precincting committee is an advisory group to the select board?
We're trying to split the town into 50/50.
yeah.
I understand, but someone has to do it.
Right.
And the problem of someone has to do it.
Yeah, okay. So what we should do is at our next meeting, put something on the agenda where we get out the map and look at the map and look at the precincts.
I don't think
But we are, we've made a vote to have 5 at large and 2 elected representing the 99. So we can look at that and determine what the 99 will be for that. That we
But
can-
then, but this is a commission doing a job into the distant
No, no,
future.
no.
And therefore, we have to be able to say what's going to happen in 2030 and 2032.
So-
And so you can't simply say, these 9 are here and these 9 are there.
So when the 2030 census comes out and the selectmen approve while working with the redistricting group, they will take a look at, will there be an equal number or will there be some needed adjustment? They can have that discussion in the future to adjust with the realities of the growth of the town in terms of these two selectmen and how they'll represent the town. So the primary thing, 2030 comes in, got to do the census, got to do the precincts, get approval by the state. Then locally here, we can then say, okay, these 2 regional select persons, how will they equally, because we don't know what that number is in the future.
Right.
They should be able, this can fluctuate into the future with that discussion with the working group and kind of looking at how it will happen after state approval, because that's priority.
So I think, if I understand what you're saying,
Yeah.
is we've just said, since they're an advisory group, that the decision is going to be made by the select board.
No, they would have to discuss that. Now that we've done this, we'd have to give an added responsibility to the working group. Not only will they work with the selectmen to come up with future precincts, and the selectmen make the final call and the state makes the final call, but it would come back to the working group to make that adjustment, to make sure that these 2 regional select persons have an equal portion of precincts.
Mr. Chairman, do you want to,
May I?
do we want to make this now, or do we want to?
Let's hear some further
postpone?
discussion. I'm going to ask Collins to weigh in here in just a minute, Libby, but back to the commission. David?
It seems to me, you know, having looked at other charters, every charter includes a transition, you know, paragraphs or sections on transition. So I would propose that in our potential charter, we have a preliminary, you know, proposal as part of the transition about the timing and about stuff. But then, you know, I've been thinking about redistricting for a long time, and clearly we can put into both our new charter about this redistricting committee, but when that time comes, they consider adding precincts in some multiple of the regions that we have, so that if it looks like you only need to add 1, you know, you add 2. I mean, you always try to keep the breakdown. But I think the initial one, Larry's absolutely right. We need to have something in there. Could be a study committee, but to me, it could be the transition about when the elections are for the different selectmen, and the proposal is precincts 1 through 9 and 10 through 18, but in some way. So it can be dealt with short-term and long-term.
Right. Scott?
I don't think it's really as much of a concern of how many precincts or any of that other stuff. It's more about, we're talking geographical. We could go by, what's across, longitude? as across. So we could basically have a Plymouth Mason-Dixon line. We could put up a nice historic sign that says, welcome to the historic South Plymouth or something. But like I said, where it's selectmen, you know, I don't think it's really, you can smile, Billy, it was funny. You could, you're not really worried as much as population as we're talking about these geographical areas that feel underrepresented. Seat of
It
vote.
needs to be by precinct, otherwise you'll screw up all the voting and who votes for who. Crazy.
Okay, Betsy?
Yes, I find that in my own thoughts, you know, so as I've thought about this over the year, that I find the town council the scariest form of government for a town. That town councils are in charge of everything, budgets, you know, so forth. So I am concerned that what we're talking about is leading us slowly and gradually and maybe inadvertently towards a town council. And
I would say
I think-
advertently, but.
Yeah, for David, it's on purpose. I know maybe he
Yeah,
really
yeah,
really
so-
wants
so-
a town council, and I'm really
Yeah,
terrified of a
so-
town council.
So we agree to disagree.
So, right, and my research hasn't given me a lot of reasons to be positive about a town council. However, one of the reasons I'm against all this figuring out which district, which precinct, how to vote, how is it going to get on the ballot, is because I think it's creeping towards town council, and I know that's what some of our members want, and I respect their opinion. But I just want everyone to know that as we begin this discussion of how to precinct or redistrict, or how is it going to get on people's ballots, that we are creeping towards a town council, and that's why although I'm for 7, so we can have a less
Betsy,
onerous job, I am not for any kind of a precinct, district, whatever.
David?
Already decided.
I'm not trying to be rigid, I'm not trying to be unmovable. I know we've already taken a vote, but listen to what you're saying. You want to use longitudes, you want to use villages, you want to do this, you want to do that. You have 18 precincts, and each has a polling place. So you can't do longitudes, you can't do villages, you can't do areas. It's going to be a tedious, cumbersome task to try to divide this town up and keep dividing it into the future. And bear in mind that if the state comes down and says, we don't like your plan, all of your hard-earned work is going to go up in smoke. So we're really, really, really drifting away from the logical. We want to open up the patient and we want to create a new thing. Everything's on the table. But we don't want to open up the patient, take out his heart, and put in the spleen in place of it. So let's be logical about this and not be so rigid about, it's got to be north and south, it's got to be this, it's got to be that. 7 members, we've agreed to that. I firmly disagree with that adamantly because I know I sat on that board and 5 of us could handle everything that was going on. And I know that some people leave because of family commitments and things like that, but I hardly think the workload is so severe. I not only served on the selectmen, I was on the chairman of the first capital outlay committee, I was chairman of the first nuclear matters committee, I was chairman of the first road committee, I ran my own business, I figured jobs, I did bills and things. If you can't put up with the workload, then don't run for a second term.
Larry?
I think, you know, I'll reiterate the fact that we're going to have to make a statement of who does this. But in addition to that, we also have to give the clerk, the Newtown clerk, bless Kelly McElrath's heart, we have to give her direction on how the terms are going to proceed. So are we going to terminate the present board? Are we going to add a person, because we're subtracting one at-large member of the board? It's up to us to make a determination as to how, do we have, I'm assuming we have the 2 at-large people have to be elected at the same time. We've had a 2-2-1 ever since we've had 5 select people. How are we going to consider this rolling change that we've had in the past? Are we going to maintain that or have all 7 run in the same election?
Good questions, Larry.
Mr. Chairman, people move to this town from all over the country, especially the Pine Hills. People come from all over. And one of the comments I hear from them, how does that government work? To them, it's gobbledygook. To them, it's something they've never seen before. They know county government oftentimes. That's the, I think, prevalent government across the nation. And basically, they don't have a role to play in county government. So they come here where there's all these permutations, all these committees, and to them, it looks like mass confusion. But in fact, we know it's not. We know it's historic. We know it works. So we're making some new changes, and there are some things that will be in question. There are also some things that there'll be ramifications for that we have to make, but I don't see it as an insurmountable problem at all. As a matter of fact, I have faith the same way that the precinct committee got together this year. Oh, by the way, the entire town meeting had to run for office again. All brand new, everybody had to run. I don't see it as a problem that if some select board members have to run again, even though they thought they had a 3-year term or maybe it's expired, then that's a problem. As a matter of fact, being a select board member is a privilege, as being any elected member in town is a privilege. And I think they should welcome the opportunity to grow with the town.
I'm sorry if I was unclear. I didn't say it was a problem. I said we need a solution.
Can I suggest to our consultants, Libby, you see the issue that we're dealing with, we decided we do want a select board made up of 7 members, 5 at large and 2 regional. Is the initial makeup, is that something that is handled best in the transition section at the end of our charter? And then once it's in motion and been established, the redistricting committee would take over in the next cycle from there. But is that something that, how it's formatted initially and put in place that could be in that transition section?
Well, I think you have a few issues you're going to have to work out, and you can do that in the transition. What first comes to mind would be to use a transition, if you're committed to having some type of regional representation, is it the will of the commission that this happens immediately, or that this happens over time, and would you consult with the Secretary of State when you're trying to determine the division of districts for at-large representation?
So, okay.
I think what one of the things that you could consider is you could consider, once the charter is passed, you're going to have to get an opinion from the state anyways. So these are issues that they might flag, but you could, in your transition language, have the increase to 7 go into effect, take a year to have some type of we call it an implementation committee, to recommend the best process to implement the change. And you would give them a certain amount of time to file a report, and then the change would become effective, and all that would be specified in your transition provisions. But it gives people a chance, it gives a chance to work out this process, so you're not working it out right now. You've made the decision you want 7, you've made the decision you want 2, or at least 2. If you decide to do an implementation committee, what you could do is say, we want some form of regionalization. You could leave it more open and allow the implementation committee to come back and make a recommendation. Or you could say, we know we want 2, and have the implementation committee come back and give you the best process for doing that.
So I'm just concerned by that. It's that scenario is a little less defined in terms of what we're actually going to get and how it's going to work. I think people are going to want to know that when the charter goes on the ballot, we want to be able to speak to that effectively and how that process, rather than kick the can down the road, I think that we should try to put some definition on how that would happen. Yes, in the first year, there'd be an implementation committee. I like that idea, to look at it and implement that. But in the following years, you would, any needed adjustment would be done by that working group in the future after the Secretary of State approves the precinct. That committee would be required to revisit that. That was my thought about trying to adjust to what Larry was saying, that how would you manage this beyond the 2030 census, that if the town did grow by a number of precincts, and David had indicated that one of the things you could do is always grow by two, an even number. That was kind of, which helps Plymouth deal with, managing the number of people in precincts. So I see that as a way of dealing with it. But I'm trying to think about how we could do something in this charter that we could effectively explain to people how it would work. And my thought is, going in the direction of this implementation committee sounds like over a year period of time, if it passes, that's how we would do it. But how do we address this thing that Larry keeps bringing up, and that is, how do we proceed after 2030 when that census comes in? Is there some identification that we can put in there that the future working group will review the precincts after the Secretary of State approves them, to see how that will work out? Does that help at all?
So I hear two
Yep.
points that you're making.
Yep.
And one is, this commission might want to give more definition to an implementation committee about the regions that they're looking at for the regional representation, whether it's north and south, or however you decide to do it. And you could certainly make a specification to an implementation committee and say, we'd like you to explore how best to implement this with north and south representation. And that would give the voters an idea at the polls about what you'd be looking at, without having specific information, but giving them some general understanding. The other part that I heard that you were speaking about is, in the future, I raised the concern that the Attorney General might be interested to know how this is going to affect re-precincting down the road. And, I think that I think the Attorney General is going to be interested in the idea of requiring, how you would require, whether or not you would require a proportional number of precincts to be added, or whether you would adjust the number of selectmen, the select board, to the regional representation on the select board. So we'd have to give that some thought. Like I said, the state has very specific rules about precincting. So, we'd really have to think about how that's going to be impacted, whether or not you're going to increase by 2, if you need to increase precincts, if that is determined, or whether or not you're going to revisit how the regional representation works in Plymouth and get that to fit the number of precincts that the state thinks is appropriate for Plymouth.
Lippy, on the second portion of that, what I was just thinking was that obviously 2030 happens, the census comes out, the town is required to look at those precincts, and meet the state guidelines, they do their precincts. And the working group will be assembled to advise the selectmen, and the selectmen will make that decision and send it to the Secretary of State's office. The greatest concern they have is, maybe Larry can talk to this, the greatest concern they have is on the Senate districts, making sure that the Senate district and the House district seats are appropriately apportioned. But here in Plymouth, when it comes to our selectmen, I think we have this ability to wait for the state to do its work, and then at that point to see if there's any need to identify what these 2 select persons might end up representing in terms of the new precinct scenario. Is that not allowed, or would we have to go to the Secretary of State in advance and give them our select board, what precincts these 2 select boards represent? Is that something that we have to do in advance of them making a decision?
Well, the scenario that I'm thinking of is that if the state says that Plymouth needs to increase its precincts by 1.
Yep.
That's what I'm struggling with, is how you handle that as a town.
Right. But the town could,
and like-
the town could go,
You-
it could go to 2 if it wanted to. The state will say, you definitely have to meet our guidelines, you got to go to 1, but there's nothing stopping us to go to 2. That's how we ended up with 18 this time.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion.
Libby, did you finish your thought?
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought she was done. I would like to.
No, it's fine, Ms. Hall. I
okay.
think that the problem is we're kind of, this is something new, and that's not a problem, but it's just we're kind of working it out as we go. So part of this would be us looking at it, thinking about it, and trying to put pen to paper to come up with a best practice for Plymouth in working out this new scenario.
Could I
Thank you.
respond to Bill?
Yeah, I would like to make a motion. I voted on the prevailing side of the motion to have 7 select board members. I would like to have us reconsider that motion. I would like to change my vote.
Okay.
Is that, point of order, that's a town meeting regulation. Is that also hold true
Certainly
in
reconsider it.
commissions and
motion here.
boards? I mean, automatic reconsideration because she was on the
So,
prevail.
is there any discussion of whether or not we should reconsider? We can certainly reconsider. So Betsy has moved to reconsider the motion to have 7, and that was seconded? Should we, any further discussion on the motion? All in favor of reconsidering the motion to have 7 select board members, raise their hand. Got 1, 2, 3. All opposed? Looks like 6 to 3 again. 3 in favor of reconsideration and 6 opposed. Larry?
I wanted, Bill asked for clarification. I think I do know something about re-precincting. Bill's correct. The state allows, you can't have more than 4,000 people in a precinct, but you can have as many precincts as you want, basically, as long as they're proportional and shaped correctly. So that the state, I've never heard that the state would have said, you must add 1 precinct. They might say you must add at least 1 precinct. So I think that at some point, we're going to have to do what someone suggested and add to the, and I've seen this in other charters, add to the section by saying that whenever the town changes its number of precincts, it must be divisible by 2. I mean, theoretically, we could lose population, but if we did that. The second matter, Bill keeps talking about the working group that we're proposing to have to advise the select board. To advise the select board. I remember when I took poli-sci back in the day, the term was sovereignty. Someone has to be the final statement, and I think we're going to have to recognize that fine to have the advice come from this working group, but we're also going to have to state that in addition to having the select board make the decision on making the state division into precincts, the select board also is going to have to be given the power, unless someone could come up with a good solution on making this dividing line within the town going forward.
That's why I thought it would be, the working group would come back and make that decision to separate the select from really designing their own precincts. I don't think that's a good idea.
I can't imagine a working group being given an awesome responsibility with
Well,
final decision-making
we could
powers.
avoid that by making the divisible by 2, as David Peck has indicated. That would just solve the problem there.
Larry, why is this such an insurmountable problem? If
could be
this
solved.
working group is going to decide the precincts, subject to the select board making the final decision,
Subject to the select board.
so why,
making-
that's
yeah.
fine.
Yeah, and
Here too.
So what I'm saying is, that's fine, and then the division into
Right.
the select board districts, subject to the final decision of the select board.
Who else? That's fine.
Good. That, I-
Yeah, we solved it. Oh, nervous about them creating their own districts.
It's just,
Okay, so
it's,
if we-
it's 7 select board members agreeing to their 2 at-large districts. And I would think it would be a very politically tenuous decision to say, for the select board to say, you know, we're going to create this district that's North Plymouth only because it's the original. It's not going to happen that way. It's going to be a public process, just the way the precinct process was. And I think that worked out this year very well. And it came from pressure from the COPC in large part to make that happen. And we're kind of institutionalizing that pressure.
Okay, we're ready to move on to the next couple of points here. In the select board section, I want to just call your attention to some items that we've discussed. I want to finalize them. We said that in 3.1-2, which talked about vacancies in the office of selectmen, we would add a provision for the next highest vote getter to take over the slot. We wouldn't have to have a special election. The charters we reviewed that had such a provision had a minimum number of votes that that second person would have to have received. In other words, it would say it would be the next highest vote getter, provided he or she got at least X percent of the vote. What do you propose for the X percent? Larry?
Well, I have, you know, first of all, we now have regional select board members and at-large select board members, and therefore, you're going to have to make a definition. And secondly, historically, the select board has had this or that, and the idea that for the select board, you really want to have the opposite of the person who won become automatically a member of the select board. It was never my fondest dream to run an extra election, but the select board is an important part of the town of Plymouth, and I think it would be a terrible mistake to try to override state law, which at this point calls for a possible election to replace a select board member.
Libby, are we bound by anything that's in the state statutes that would keep us from having the next highest vote getter fill the vacancy?
So the state law does provide, as was said, to fill it with an election. You could, you know, I don't know how the Attorney General would look at that, but you could propose filling it with the next highest vote getter, if that's the will of this commission, and we can see what the Attorney General says about it.
Well, there are examples in other charters. I forget, it was Bill Ricker or some charter I read, it was spelled out how that would work. And I think that's where I saw the 25%. So we've heard Larry's view. Presley?
Yeah, I just have a question. If it's good enough for town meeting, why isn't it good enough for select board?
My God, town meeting is a wholly different animal. Town meeting is 162 people who,
Yep.
by the nature of the process, is supposed to be a generalist group. You know, that's the reason that as far as I know, every other community has no conflict of interest, because it's such a large group that you don't need to concentrate to that degree on any one person.
I'm just talking about the next highest vote getter.
I understand.
Okay.
But for the select board, you know, with town meeting representatives, you might have 9 or at least 3 people running, and so the next, and in general, these people don't run on very specific platforms, whereas the select board people do. And to lock in a situation where the next highest vote getter would be automatically put in, it just seems politically unsound.
Larry, you know, a year ago, we were in this position. where you had to have a special election to fill a vacancy. I remember at the time how many citizens said to us, why don't we have a provision that says the next highest vote getter fills the vacancy? At that time, several of us at this commission were reading charters. We found it in other charters. I didn't personally think it was such a big deal. It made common sense.
No,
I'm surprised that you seem to be thinking somehow this is undemocratic.
as far as I'm concerned, it is a huge deal.
Okay,
It is,
thank you.
I mean, if we're going to consider it, I don't think this is something that we just kind of throw out.
Well, let's talk about it, see how the commission feels about it. Any other views on this particular point?
I remember, I believe, that the time that we first started discussing this, one of the concerns was, well, the confusion, the cost, a lot of different things. And the notion was that we were going to temporarily resolve the situation. And myself, I was personally opposed to the notion of the next highest vote getter because I thought that kind of prejudiced the political process a bit. It gave this person the position, put them in good stead for a future run, and who knows where that level of support they might have had. And I was suggesting at the time, to bring this back to that initial discussion, was that we should have the ability to appoint a selectman emeritus, and that person would fulfill the role only until the election came around. I think Mr. Pizer has,
Who would appoint him?
yeah, that there would be a person that was appointed to that position that could fulfill the role.
I say,
That
who
this would be an honorary position, that they wouldn't fulfill the role on the board until and unless. Meaning they would be somebody that could serve official like roles, that could be at ribbon cutting, it's kind of like the Lord Mayor or something, but that this person had the respect of the community enough so that if this came about, because we were really put in a bad situation when Selectman, the step down, I forget her name, isn't that wonderful? I've watched that out of my,
Bill Joyce.
when Selectman Joyce decided that suddenly she was leaving. So, anyway,
So I do believe that the job of a select person is an awesome responsibility.
Yeah.
There's a lot of moving parts to that job. I can't imagine that we would just grab the next vote getter down the, I don't feel comfortable with that. Because each election is different, each issue is different, time passes. I would refrain from that. The thing that I had reservations about when Sheila stepped down and we had that vacancy, there was some talk about, well, if the election is less than a year away, we can leave it vacant. That's the thing that upset people, that we need to crunch that time down, that the town does not go unnecessarily vacant, that there's a vacancy, because there was this debate that was going on at the time. Why do we even have to have a special? Why can't we just leave the post left unoccupied for nearly 9 months? And I think we need to tighten that language up in the charter that does not leave the town exposed like that without a select person, whether it's we have the special election, or if we get even into the crunch time, rather than do nothing, they just appoint somebody at meritus to serve that 4-month period of time. That would be a better way of making sure that the board had always had a full complement. They weren't operating with one less person. You'd have the special election that would be triggered, that you had to elect somebody, but at a certain point in time, realistically, there's going to be this election in a couple of months. Why are we having election now? So why don't we just have somebody emeritus, like Frank says, to just fill the gap to get us to the next election? But there should be a deadline there. I think
Okay,
Rustling wants to.
Rustling.
Yeah, and I only asked the question, Larry. I think it is important, and I think it is different. But what I was getting from the people is it's expensive to run an election. And, to have that special election, while, the discussion was, why don't we just leave it vacant? Can we leave it vacant? I do think that we should, tighten up the language, and we should, make recommendations. It just, anytime we have a special election or a special town meeting, it's expensive. And that's what the town people are looking at me and saying, we're gonna have another election, how much is that gonna cost? And That's what people are looking at. And I don't know the answer, but I think we definitely need to tighten up that language.
Mr. Chairman,
I think
I'm sorry.
that, first of all, special town meetings are cheap. They're not expensive. The only thing we basically have to pay, it's cheap, it's nice for me to say, but compared with a special election, we're talking about a policeman on overtime, and a few other pieces. It's not like a special election. But the special election basically is going to cost something on the order of $40,000. We have a $275 million budget. And while I don't want to throw money around, democracy is not necessarily cheap. So I think that $40,000 and hamstringing the clerk's office over a period of weeks is something not to be ignored. But it's democracy, and it's something that's necessary. As far as the question that Bill brought up, the law goes on to say that there is the option of not having having a vacancy continue until the next town election, but a very small number of, I think it's 100 registered voters can sign a petition demanding an election. So it's not something that the select board could do on its own without any oversight. If you go all the way back to Albert Thompson, the select board determined at that time not to have an election. Alba determined with 99 of her closest friends to have an election. She won. So state law actually does take that into account. I'm going to suggest that we have a situation that works. I would be very much against changing it.
David?
Yeah, I'm just wondering when we move to 7, is having a vacant position until the next election as much of a hardship as it is now when you have a vacancy in 5? So just, it's sort of a question.
David Malaguti?
Well, I can speak to that. Obviously, you have another person, you have another 2 people on board, so this supposed great workload can be spread out a little bit more, but it also depends on dynamics. If the board is locked in a lot of 3-3 votes, it's going to be a problem, just as it was back in '86 when Roger Silver stepped down, longtime selectman, and he actually came back to serve later on. He stepped down because he took a job that was conflicting with the town, so he stepped down and Alba filled his place. There were a lot of situations where there could have been 2-2 votes there, and then you can't get anything done. So it depends on the circumstances.
Okay, it appears to be a consensus of no change in this current charter section.
Do you want a motion on that? I'll certainly make that motion.
If nobody wants to make a change, you just proceed. Back to the draft charter. Again, I just want to bring to everyone's attention, after you read it, you will see that the language that we've been discussing for the last several weeks on the moderator, finance committee, all that has now been included. Also, I put in for you to look at the preamble that David Peck furnished with some edits. That's now in there as a draft for everybody to see if that is satisfactory. And then when we get into the select board section, the key thing that we talked about was the powers and responsibilities and not be involved in day-to-day stuff and only be acting through the town manager. That language you'll see is now in the charter in 3-2-1 as a draft. I did there was took the combination of 2 or 3 very strong provisions from other charters that make those points, so please read it. The idea was, again, that the select board would be concentrating, not ever doing any day-to-day administration, but on long-range policy.
So can I just, David? So David, your preamble,
Yeah.
what you're adding to this is pretty much point 1, 2, 3, 4 in the last paragraph? Is that all new?
Correct.
Okay.
It's as a first draft. If you remember, we were all challenged
Yep.
by the chair to come up with some draft things. So it's a first draft, just for, I welcome comments. I tried to make it high and aspirational, that we could all agree on. But I didn't undo anything in our existing preamble
Okay.
charter. I just was additional as a first draft for all of us to look at and make better.
Okay.
Okay, at the, another addition, if you look at, is 3-17-1, which is legal counsel. That's short enough that I can read that one. It would say, not less than every 3 years, the select board shall review the appointment of outside independent legal counsel and/or the employment of one or more attorneys as employees of the town. This review process shall include at a minimum an opportunity for public comment. That's at the very end of chapter 3, in 3-17-1. Discussion? There.
If the manager appoints the select board, are you changing that to this? I'm just kidding, the appoints. No, sorry. If the, I got it wrong
When we
anyway.
discussed this, we thought the select board should review the appointment of outside counsel, not the town manager.
Right, but so is this a suggestion that the select board is going to choose town council, or simply choose, is the select board going to choose the mode of town council? Who, I'm not,
It's a review. Yeah.
so then we're not taking any power away from
The
the
town.
town manager? The select board is simply going to make a statement
that's
of,
right.
this is their opinion.
Yeah, the thought process there was that currently, the town manager hires counsel, and the council stays 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years. Obviously, under the procurement laws, it doesn't require it going out to bid or any other reviewing process. What we wanted to do was put in the charter where every 3 years, the town manager would have to make a presentation at a selectmen's meeting, at a public hearing, the performance of council, and the board would have to either vote to continue with this firm or, instruct the town manager to, look at other options.
Well, now, that's not what I
Right.
just got. Is
So
it,
this is the only mention right now of town council, is this section. Town manager would be doing all of the appointments.
right, but Bill just made a statement that the select board would make the choice. My understanding is,
Action review. I think probably that's not correct. Select board would review the appointment.
so we're basically talking about sunlight. We're talking about the town manager is going to defend his proposal for choice of how the town will engage council. And then the select board will say, we like it, we don't like it. And then the town manager retains the responsibility to go forth and do what he wants.
Well, that was.
After listening to the select board, but we're still investing the power to oversee council.
Isn't that what this commission wanted to?
But we wanted, forgive me if I'm wrong, because we debated this and voted on it and talked about it, and we might have to go back to the minutes, but my understanding was that what we wanted to have a public hearing on town council performance, and at the end of that presentation, the board would make a decision whether to continue with council or instruct the town manager to look at other options.
See, now, that's not what
I thought that's what I had
Right.
proposed. I don't know
No,
if,
there is twofold. It's casting daylight on it, but it's also stirring it up to the surface so that it just doesn't go along by inertia.
No, I understand, but I'm back to my sovereignty question.
I suppose the
Who
town
makes-
manager could just tell the select board they're not going to change it.
Okay, so basically, he's going to make a
This
presentation
would
to the
make a public
select board.
process of the decision.
The select board's going to say whatever the select board wants to say at that point, and then the town manager, having listened, will go do what he chooses to do.
And the public can comment as well.
Yeah, of
Yeah.
course, yeah, of
Right.
course. No, I think, in that case, I'm fine.
Good, okay.
So I'm, what was that? What was that, Russell?
You got something to say?
What was that?
Go ahead.
Okay.
With respect to the moderator, we made some changes in Chapter 5 regarding elections, because the moderator way of electing changes, and Chapter 5 had to reflect that. So those changes are now suggested. Libby, did you have a comment?
This is Pat.
Pat, yep.
Hi. I was not there for your original discussions on this provision, and Libby has recused herself from this particular provision, but since there seems to be some differences of how this provision might be read, can I suggest that the 317.1 include something about the select board shall review the appointment of outside counsel, et cetera, and make recommendations and present its opinions to the town manager, make it clear that the town manager still is retaining the right to keep that counsel, because it sounds like it's unclear to the Charter Commission, so it will probably be unclear to future readers of this provision.
Okay, good point. Got it?
If you like, I can add something to it and then send it over to you after the meeting.
Thank you. So let's see, David?
Yes, because we're looking at Chapter 3. At least two other kind of provisions are in there. One is open space, and the other is building committee. In both cases, the building committee is reviewing the language and will vote to recommend potential changes to 316. And the open space committee has also voted on potential additional language to be
Okay.
to recommend to the commission for incorporation.
And so did the Land Use and Acquisition Committee.
Yeah, and then we
So we've
also
got
were going
three
to
committees to
take
hear
out that,
from.
that industrial or the
Right.
the section 12 or we're going to do some editing there. But, so shall those just be submitted to the Charter Commission kind of through?
Well, we need their input for those three,
Right.
this Open Space, Building Committee, and Land Acquisition Committee.
Yeah, and I can't speak for land acquisition, but
No,
are
they
they,
contacted
are
us.
they working on looking at their language?
Pardon me?
Are they looking, do you know if they are looking at their language in the charter?
I don't know about Open Space or Building Committee, you just said they are.
Yes, those two are. I don't know about land use.
Well, the land use is, I went to their meeting and they asked to make some changes to their language. I'm taking the industrial, since nothing is said there, we can eliminate that altogether.
I thought that's what they agreed. There's nothing there.
There's nothing there. It should come out.
Pardon me, section 11.
When the town manager approached us and testified before the
Right.
commission, he suggested pretty strongly that several of the department sections be eliminated, and I think he has good reason for that. Is this the time we should be talking about this?
Yep, I have actually his draft right here with his changes on it. I don't remember that specific suggestion. What I heard him say was the qualifications should not be in the charter because didn't give us the flexibility to hire certain people. He thought that he actually marked up a draft of it, Larry, I have that right here, and those changes have yet to be inputted in that section.
Maybe the best solution would be for you to distribute that so that we could take it up.
You already have that. But it was a very, I think I brought it right here.
Why don't we redistribute? We can always
It was
take the
just
town
a-
manager's recommendations.
Just a
and-
marked draft, and with his comments in the margin, and largely in chapter 3, and I'll send another copy to you. I think David's got it there.
Is it dated 5/2/22? Because if that's the one, I have it in my hand.
Yeah. Why don't we send that around again?
Yeah, we'll send it again.
Yeah, send it around.
Okay, anything further on chapter 3?
Yes, Bill? One
Betsy?
thing we had talked about way at the beginning was, should the Conservation Commission be elected or appointed? So I just want to bring that back up while we're on chapter 3. I can see good reasons to have the Conservation Commission elected rather than appointed. I'm sure there are arguments on both sides. But with, 350 ponds and miles of ocean and, wetlands and rivers and so forth, we need the most protection we can have for our wetlands. So one possibility would be to change from an appointment to an election.
So Betsy, you're proposing that the Conservation Commission be elected body.
Yes, I think we should discuss that possibility.
David?
I want to ask Collins or council about it, because
There was
I
statute.
dove into, looking at the state law, and I think the law says shall be appointed. So I don't know whether we
Sure.
could kind of overrule it and elect as well.
Mr. Chairman,
So-
does it say, through you to David, does it say appointed by whom?
I think it says, either the select board or the council or the mayor. I mean,
Because, looking at, that's a broader issue, I think, the appointments to committees and commissions in the town. It's both an ungainly thing for the select board to have as their sole responsibility, and one that's prone to the potential for politicization. I'd like to see, just throw this out for discussion. at
Frank,
some-
this is actually on the list for, it's going to be the next item we're going to discuss, because there was discussion about a separate appointing committee.
Appointing committee,
And it's
yes.
in your
Yeah,
draft.
I
Could we
think it's
ask
a
the
broad, important
Collins?
issue.
Representatives, if they know what the state law is on conservation commissions?
It's, go ahead.
It's appointed.
they,
State law is that it has to be appointed by select board?
Yes, by select board, but that doesn't mean, you try to change it through your charter.
I see.
yeah, I don't know whether our charter can override state law.
Well, it does in a number of instances, but it does, you'd have to really look at that, and we'd have to do some more research into that. But that's not to say it shouldn't be considered or that you couldn't consider it. I don't know off the top of my head anywhere that it is elected.
What about changing the actual appointing authority? Libby, we were,
Changing it to, like, the moderator, for instance, or?
well, no, I know a couple of commissioners have an idea of setting up a appointments committee of several members, three, 4, or 5 members, who would make a wide range of appointments, presumably on a nonpartisan basis, to important committees within the town. And Frank's suggestion also had that same committee have the power to remove members of committees that had been appointed for various reasons. And had some examples, not actually from other states. Do you know of that having been done in Massachusetts in any of the charters?
No, I don't. Again, you're making a change to a uniform state law, which, we'd have to see how that is received.
Well, I mean,
But I
some of
don't
these,
know of any that do that currently with the Conservation Commission.
well, what about a committee that's not part of like a conservation commission, but another type of committee other than, one that's named in the state statute? Does it depend on what
So,
committee?
a general committee to review appointments, yes, I have seen that.
I think Frank wanted to talk?
No.
Okay. No, I was just thinking that something that we should consider at some point in time is that the town of Plymouth, the town meeting form of government, has nearly 400 people serving on boards and committees across the town. And the thought process there would be to depoliticize that appointment process, that the appointment of committees and boards would be done by an independent, nonpartisan commission that you would submit your resume to, and they would appoint. Obviously, this entity would have representation from the select board, from the committees of precinct chairs. You could make up this entity. I would prefer this entity to actually have town-wide approval, where a couple of its members are elected by the residents of Plymouth to sit on this nonpartisan appointment commission that would accept resumes and would appoint people to committees. Because there's another big, huge problem out there with this committee appointment process. Because you have all these different boards and committees appointing people to committees. There's a lot of confusion on who's in the committees. When does the job start? When does it end? What is the scope of responsibilities of that committee? And keeping that information current and available to the residents. Because right now, if you went down to the clerk's office and had said, could I have a list of all the appointed people in the town of Plymouth? You would not get an accurate list of some of these committees, because some of this information, as I've learned through the clerk's office, they get the information from the appointing bodies, it gets down there. But I know that these lists are not current, because I've recognized some of the names have moved on or not on these committees. We'll do mailings to these people, and we'll send out 300-400 letters of people serving on committees and boards on Plymouth, and many of them come back. We don't have accurate information about who's sitting on these committees, when they're appointed, when they expire, what their scope of responsibilities for. This entity could do more than just appoint people, but organize the committee process across the town. I always hear there's too many committees in Plymouth, and the committees don't know what they're doing. I think that if we would organize the committees better, give them some direction, have some accountability and transparency of information, you might have a better effect when it comes to the implementation of the committee process. And at the same time, depoliticize it so that people are appointed by their qualifications.
Mr. Chairman, there also is a problem with the process itself of making appointments. Every committee seems to do it in a different fashion. Many seem made up of out of whole cloth. They don't follow a fair, open process. The planning board recently had a process where nominations were received for, and so let's say there were 10 people that were interested in a position. If you didn't nominate your person right away, they didn't get a vote. I thought that was an unfair process, and I think just one that spoke to there is no specific process that is followed in making all these hundreds of committee appointments. And as we say over and over again, we're a bigger, more expensive, billion-dollar entity, but we don't have a process that we follow in these very important committee appointments, and I think some work needs to be done there.
Bill?
Larry.
Two things. Chapter 40, Section 8C, which is the Conservation Commission, says that in a town, in the manager form of government, the manager appoints the Conservation Commission. Might be interesting to point that out. That's what state law says. So that has to do with that. I'm not disagreeing with Bill's idea necessarily. I'm not sure I do agree with it, but I'm not disagreeing with the idea that who should make the appointment. However, having been clerk for 28 years, the clerk's office most certainly does have an accurate list of appointments as presented to the clerk's office by the appointing committee. It's also the case that state law directs that a person serves until he retires or is replaced. And therefore, it is entirely possible for a person's name to continue on the rolls until the appointing authority takes action. So, both of the parts you say are also true. But it is the case, I think, that we elect the select board, for good or ill, to do certain things, and most of the committees they appoint are advisory. to the select board. You know, they give them some authority, but basically the authority lies within the select board. So I'm not positive this is one of the areas that I would choose to remove authority from the select board.
Okay, two things. We're approaching public comment, but before we start public comment, I just have a question. Libby, your hand is raised. Did you want to speak on a previous point?
I just wanted to address two issues. One is your charter provides, your current charter provides that your Board of Selectmen appoints your Conservation Commission. And I just wanted to make that was just raised at the town manager. I'm not sure if we're talking about the same thing, but your charter provides that.
So does that override the
select board
state
appointment.
statute, Libby?
That does override the state statute. That's the law in Plymouth.
Okay.
So the select board in Plymouth appoints, unless there is, there's another amendment that I'm not looking at, but I have the charter in front of me and that's what I'm reading from.
Right.
So,
Thank you.
that's just on the issue of town manager appointment. But what I wanted to speak in terms of having a board or a committee review nominations and appointments, it is a lighter lift in communities, and this is what I've seen done before, just so I can flesh it out and give you another possibility, is where you have a committee or a board that reviews nominations. It takes the nominations in for appointments to a committee. It does not change the appointing authority. So the appointing authority remains with whoever it is. But what this board does is it takes all the applications in, it reviews them, it develops the process, and then it submits a recommendation to the appointing authority. That way you're still retaining the same appointing authority. There's transparency. It removes many of the goals that you've already stated. It accomplishes those without changing the appointing authority. And it is a little bit of a lighter lift, while, like I said, increasing transparency, depoliticizing, creating an independent board to review nominations. And even if the appointing authority decides not to accept that recommendation, they generally have to give a reason why. So it allows that discussion to happen.
Libby, can I ask you, so could you please dig into that further and tell us exactly how far charters have gone, though, with respect to having the appointing authority remain within the committee that we're discussing?
You'd like me
Rather
to put
simply as an
together
advisory
some
capacity.
language, or-
We'd just like to know if there is a possibility there. Bill, did you want to add anything?
Yes,
Yeah.
I just wanted to go back to Larry indicated, I wasn't saying that there was information that wasn't prepared diligently, or that wasn't my point. For 20 years, I've been doing my best to keep committee members across the town of Plymouth involved in some of our decision-making process for the Community Preservation Committee. So I've always done these mailings to them, letting them know about what our activities are, and what I have noticed when I get the list, and I print it out and I start doing my labels. I'm like, wait a second, there are a lot of people here that are no longer in this town. They're still identified, and the town is holding them in this capacity. That list is only as good as what information is coming in from the appointing authorities. What I was trying to figure out, Larry, was a way of getting that information quickly and accurately. I actually had this idea where if you were to be appointed by a committee, you would get a letter saying that you've been appointed by that committee, and then give an access code to the town website where you would go in and put your information in. So there would be some source we could go to find out who's currently serving on all these committees and boards. But going back to what Libby was indicating, yes, the idea of forming an entity that would make recommendations, it still goes to the political body. What I was trying to do was see if there was a way of depoliticizing it, where you would have this commission that would take in the resumes and make the appointments. That's what I was
And let me
looking at.
understand, you're going to look into that and see if there is a possibility. It
Yeah,
being,
I'll look into the different possibilities of changing the appointment authority. I'll also give you some scenarios of other communities. Off the top of my head, I know that Somerville, even though it's a city, the mayor has a committee that does this, you know, reviews appointments and brings forward nominations. The appointment authority remains with the mayor in that circumstance, but, you know, he has to provide a reason for not agreeing with the advisory board's recommendation that they bring forward. So that's one community off the top of my head that I know has a similar type of process involved, but not changing the appointing authority. We will look at both for you.
thank you. Michelle, for public comment, is there anybody on Zoom that wishes to comment? Is there anyone here that wishes to public comment? Mr. Lynch?
Good evening. It's been a long time, and you all seem very similar, except the only one I can see a little bit different is Mr. Vecchi, that spent some time out in the sun. Looks very nice. First, I'd like to go and offer a compliment to you, the commission, because you underwent a little bit of a contentious time period in the beginning, and I'm hearing a lot of good comments about you folks doing a very, very good job. But I'd like to ask you something here. Question. You folks started July 2021? Right? Oh, first meeting was in June. Okay, no big deal. When is the initial draft going to be presented?
What is your question?
When is the initial draft of the new charter going to be
The
presented?
first preliminary draft will be ready on September 15th.
Oh, beautiful, great. So now, I then went on the website, and I saw a couple of things that I was just curious about. It said charter drafts, and there was nothing there. What is that category for?
Michelle, the draft is there, is it not?
No, we were going to talk about that tonight, about posting it after this meeting. We talked about that this week. that
Okay.
And you were
It
going
was
to
time
place
to, it was time to put up a draft.
So you're going to put one up there
I'm
now?
going to put one
All
up.
right, thank you.
Beautiful. So this one is next, but there's also frequently asked questions. Nothing is there also, so I'll just pass over that. My next question is, I then went on to the public comments and the input. And there were a lot of people that were initially, giving some comments and stuff. My question is, there's no comment from you folks saying, this is a good idea, and this is the reason why, and we'll probably incorporate that, or this is not a good idea. I guess that's something that you folks don't want to do. I'm just asking that question, that's all.
I could just say, Mr. Lynch, in many respects, we have commented back exactly
Okay.
what you just suggested. I personally have sent many letters to people that have made suggestions with copies to the rest of the commission. The commission staff has responded to people making public comment as well. We don't do it in every case, but we certainly thank comments that are helpful and hope they continue.
So could I ask you then a question, clarifying question? If a citizen really felt strongly about something, how would he get feedback from you folks to have it actually be printed out and presented to you and with your response at that meeting or the following meeting? I'm just asking.
We don't have any prescribed format.
There's no
If we
okay.
get something in writing, it is circulated to all members of the commission. Anyone can make a comment, discuss at our meetings. In any event, it is put on our website. It's available when we do our own research, which we're in the process of doing now as we draft the charter.
Right. So here's really the $40,000 question, I guess. Is there any way a citizen can actually put forward something that you folks could then take as a motion? Okay, nothing like that, but yet if a citizen were to go and present it to a board member or a commission member, that commission member could bring it up as a motion. In other words, if that's,
Oh, absolutely.
okay,
And it happens.
all right, that's very good. And then I guess the last question, I suppose that the answer is yes, you're still taking suggestions from citizens to enhance the charter. You're still taking suggestions.
Is that a question?
You are you the commission still allowing suggestions from citizens?
Oh, yes,
Okay,
our job isn't completed until next spring.
one more time?
Long time between the preliminary draft in September and going on the ballot next May.
Well, but, and this is where now you muddy the waters a little bit for me. Your initial draft comes out, to be considered, presented to the public with all the, and that's going to be the public hearing afterwards?
Yes.
Okay, and then, but yet, 2 months later? Is that where
The final report is due 2 months later after the preliminary report. Which
Okay.
would be November 15th.
But my next question, because you said it's plenty of time until the springtime of next year, are you still saying it could be changed?
Well, most likely after November 15th, it will be very difficult to make changes. We still may be responding, though, to changes suggested or recommended by the Attorney General.
That's okay.
That's the process that takes place after November 15th.
Great. So I'll be looking forward to, and I was hoping that I could actually look at the charter itself, because it'd be very, very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Michelle, any further public comment? Let's see where we were. We were in the middle also of the planning board discussion. Oh, I know, I wanted to mention the question of alternates, which we brought up at the last meeting. And the planning board, 3 representatives who were here all responded on the question of alternates, Mr. Bulletin, Lee Hartman, and the chairman, Birgit Akeen. The commission wasn't sure. We were going to possibly look at 2 alternates. The Collins team told us that I believe you told me that with the planning board, the state statute says 1 alternate when we have a planning board of 5, and 2 alternates if there was a planning board of 7. Is that right?
That's correct.
Ken Christopher has public comment. His hand is raised.
Okay, so the question, we need to finalize that provision. What is the feeling of the board, of the commission with respect to alternates for the planning board? David?
Well, I had certainly proposed it based on the model of the ZBA, having 2 alternates, which has worked very successfully when the alternates can step in when a regular member's not available. If state law or, either requests, identifies 1 alternate per 5 members, I would accept that, being consistent with state law. But again, I would like, and you see in Lee Hartman's comments, that, providing the alternate to have full voting rights instead of just very limited ones, I still think makes sense. Again, if Council or Collins identifies that that's possible.
So David, you're suggesting 1 alternate
Which
for
is
the
what we
5
have now.
Right, but you'd have further voting powers than the current alternate.
Yeah, that's what I'm proposing. Just-
I mean, as I understand it, the current alternate just votes on special permits.
According to
not-
Lee Hartman, only the RDDs and the VOSPs.
Doesn't have full voting powers. How does the rest of the commission feel about expanding the voting powers and having 1 alternate as they presently do?
Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay, so,
Pardon me?
Yeah.
Bill?
yeah. So, having served on the Zoning Board of Appeals, that is a board that's seeing variances in special permits. These are big. These are special. These are different from RDDs and VOSDs. I think that when you start to cross over into this line of the huge impact you can have on the special permit process and the variance process, I thought about this over the week. I think that we should leave it alone. I think that's a responsibility left for the elected by the town residents to consider. I think just in appointing someone to make decisions on special permits and variances through that public hearing process, I would tend to stay away from that for now.
So, but what is your position? They should have that voting power?
No,
or should not?
no, sorry. I think we should leave that alone. I don't think that we should expand the voting privileges of the alternate on the planning board to include special permits and variances.
Yeah,
I think.
But as I understand it, that is exactly what the alternate is there for, special permits.
No, the alternate, no.
It says the current alternate can participate in special permit votes when a planning board member is absent.
And
All other votes are based on a simple majority vote, 3 out of 5 members, and many applicants are elected to proceed and so forth. So the alternates, it was Lee's suggestion that the voting power of the alternate go beyond special permits to
Oh, okay.
include simple subdivisions,
Okay.
A&R plans, and so forth.
I stand corrected.
And Mr.
I
Chair-
agree with that.
And Mr. Chairman, that's what, I understood David is suggesting, not that they vote on everything,
Right.
but that they vote in the absence of one of the
Yes.
elected members
Right.
on potentially everything.
Where a supermajority is required.
Yeah, and I think that would tend to make the board more effective, that they would not be, having to delay decisions, although I think sometimes they act too hastily. But, so I wouldn't be opposed to the alternate after the absence of, in the absence of an elected member fulfilling that role. As a matter of fact, last year, I would say Mr. Bolton never voted, not one time in the entire year as the alternate last year. So he was able to comment, but I think it's important that he might have been able to vote.
Libby, did you have a comment on this one? Or Pat? Go ahead.
My comment goes back a little ways. The statute does specifically provide that boards with 5 members can have 1 alternate, and boards with 7 can have 2. I believe we talked about the commission getting a legal opinion on whether that could be overridden. To our knowledge, that's the way the statute reads, but we didn't feel comfortable making a final decision on that, and you're going to get a legal opinion if you chose to go forward past what it says on the face of the statute.
Bill, on the zoning board, it doesn't say whether the alternates can vote or not. Actually, if you look on page 31 of the July 11th draft, excuse me, it says that the select board shall appoint a zoning board of appeals of 5 members and 2 associate members. So that's, there's 2 for 5 in the charter, and it doesn't say how they vote. I mean, it must, how was that decided that the 2 alternates for the zoning board of appeals could vote? Because I don't see it in the charter.
What section is that?
It's page 31. Sorry, it says 459, section 12.
We call them alternates on the ZBA, and they have full voting privileges.
But in the charter, it calls them associate members, and it doesn't mention how they vote in the charter.
So what was it, 3, what?
I would just say it may be in rules and regulations.
So it must be,
and,
yes, someplace else. It's not in the
but-
charter.
But certainly
That's what they
by
know.
tradition, as long as I've been ZBA,
Yeah.
the alternates step up when somebody's away.
Right, and we have 2 for 5 members. even though maybe the state statute says 1 for 5 members, we have 2 for 5 members.
But
That's
there,
planning.
Oh, that's planning.
Yeah, that's a
Oh, it's
crit-
just, that's just for planning.
it is
Oh,
a
I see.
critical difference between the two. The zoning board is appointed and the
Oh,
planning
okay.
board
Oh, I see.
is
Yeah, are
elected. So
okay.
to have two alternates that could vote could dramatically change votes for people that are not elected. I
That's
could see
right,
one
yeah.
filling in as needed. I would be worried about two doing more than filling in the absence of two people.
Yeah, I agree with the 1.
Yeah, and I'm okay with the one. One of the reasons I'm interested in this particular one is, I was approached historically to be an alternate. And when I learned that, like someone just said, Steve Bolton was there for a full year without making a single vote, and I'd heard that from Lee, I mean, to me, that limits the interested parties, that you're going to get more interested people if they know they can participate periodically. So if we can just, enlarge their ability to have full voting rights when they're substituting for a vacant member, I think it will increase the number of interested people.
Libby? From Collins, did you have a comment? You're muted.
I forgot to put my hand down after last time.
Oh. Right.
Mr. Chairman, why don't we, I would make a motion that we have one alternate who has full voting rights when needed.
One alternate with full voting rights.
When needed.
I do have one question about that. Sometimes a planning board issue goes on for months, and then finally there's a vote. So would there be any provision that that alternate would have been present for those discussions?
Okay, any further discussion on wrestling's motion that we have one alternate for a 5-member planning board?
I'll second the motion.
Seconded. Any further discussion?
Michelle has a question.
Frank? Michelle?
Bill, I know you haven't looked at your minutes yet, but on page 7 of last week's minutes, you took a vote on this with the planning staff. It's page 7. David Peck motioned that the planning board remain at 5 voting members with 2 alternates empowered with full voting privileges. Seconded by Wrestling. Betsy Hall was opposed, and the motion passed 8-1-0.
But I think there was a question whether
It was legal.
we could do that under the state
And then
statute.
it goes on to say, the motion will need a legal opinion whether an alternate can serve as a full voting member in the absence of the full member. The state does define alternate.
Where do we get that legal opinion?
So David, did you want to still push for 2?
No.
No, he's happy with 1.
Convinced with the discussion we just had that, let's stick with the 1,
Right.
but I would like the full voting privileges when a member is
Do we need a
absent.
legal opinion of
Okay,
that?
so I guess
Yes,
wrestling's motion is to have the 1 alternate with full voting rights when needed with a 5-member planning board. Any further discussion?
So
Betsy?
are we reconsidering the motion from last week? Is that what you're saying, Michelle?
No, we're
Is that
just
we're
voting tonight,
reconsidering,
Betsy.
we're reconsidering David's motion?
I
from last
voted in
week.
favor, so I'd like to reconsider.
Okay, we can always renew and review a motion.
I think,
I would like to renew the motion.
yeah,
Second reconsider.
Any further discussion on wrestling's motion? All in favor? So it is a, Frank, did you vote?
Yes, I did.
Vote again, Frank.
Looks like, I believe it's unanimous vote. Thank you.
The later it gets, the more unanimous we get.
Frank also presented today for your review a 1-page list of changes to the planning section of Chapter 3. So just read it over. Collins has it. They're looking at it too. And we can discuss it at our next meeting, which will be on Monday, August 8th. Is there any new business tonight?
we have to approve the minutes.
I have old business.
Are we ready to approve the minutes of July 11?
Motion to approve.
I
All in
have one-
favor of approval of the July
have one
11th
change.
Yeah,
minutes?
I have one minor comment.
Just go ahead.
In the introductory sentences, it says we met on Monday, July 1st, and it's supposed to be July 11th.
Right.
Otherwise, they are fine minutes.
On page 6 at the top, it said
So-
Betsy Hall asked, we get people to look at the CMP. I think I said, asked, how do we get people to look at the CMP? Just a very minor change at the top of page 6.
Motion with the changes.
Okay, all in favor of approval of the minutes with those two minor edits, please raise your hand. Minutes have been approved.
And
Is there
great
any
job on the minutes.
new business? Any old business?
Yes, I have one old business.
Pardon me?
Yes, I do. I have one old business. Scott, do you have an old business as well?
Betsy, old business?
Yes, I do.
Let Betsy go.
So on section 11, conflict of interest, you said something, Bill, that last week, which really struck me. Somebody mentioned conflict of interest with town employees, and you said the second paragraph, or addresses that. It addresses everybody else. Remember that you said that? And I have always thought that this was quite divisive to separate the town employees out from everybody else. So I would recommend that we strike conflict of interest 211.1 and just keep 211.2 and 211.3, which would become 211.1 and 211.2, so that we're not separating out any particular town meeting representative who could have a conflict of interest. Otherwise, we'd have to have a paragraph that said, if any lawyers or any real estate agents or any small business owners, we would have to separate out everybody who could possibly have a conflict of interest. But we've only separated out town employees, which again, I think tends to be divisive. So I move that we strike 211.1, and because 211.2 covers everybody. Thank you.
Betsy, what was,
Do it as a motion. We can just think
okay,
about
would you
it for next time.
repeat the motion, please?
Section 211.2 on conflict of interest covers everybody. All representative town meeting members are prohibited from conflict of interest, voting on something with which they have a financial interest. And then in section 3, we define financial interest. So 211.2 covers everybody, town employees and every other member of town meeting. I don't think we need a separate paragraph that applies just to town employees, which I think has always caused town sort of.
Betsy, the two sections, the first one says, any town meeting member who also holds a position of employment by the town. The second section says, any town meeting member, period, meaning any town meeting member, shall not vote in which he has immediate family member has an interest, a business or organization, or, a special interest, and so be it. So it is everybody else, and I believe that's exactly what's intended.
Yeah, I just don't think we need to separate town
Does
meeting members
anybody
from everybody else.
want to put this off for further meeting, or do you want to discuss it tonight?
Yeah, I think it's a little late to
Betsy,
get
make
into
the
those.
Happy to discuss it another time, but I just think it's something that is unnecessary to separate out town meeting members who are town employees. I don't think that's necessary because actually everybody who's a town meeting member is subject to this conflict of interest provision. Thank you.
Any further discussion?
Yeah, Bill, I'm very supportive of the idea, but not at 9:08. I think that this is something that you plan to bring up at the next meeting, and I think that would, if it's okay, that would be a more appropriate venue.
So, just so we know what's going to be on the agenda for the next meeting.
I'll
what
second
exactly-
Larry, but I got
We're
something
going to
too.
bring up the enforcement section. Right. Any further business?
Bill?
Motions in order?
Bill?
Yes.
All right, tomorrow night is a WATD show. It's Alex Bezanson show. It's about the county. He's asked me if I wanted to come on and talk about the Charter Commission. I would not extend that invitation to anybody else who wants to come on and talk. It's about 20 minutes, starts at 7:10 on WATD. If you want, just let me know, but I wanted to make mention here while we're still on the record. So if you want to talk to me afterwards, that's fine.
Okay. Thank you, Scott.
Motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn, seconded. All in favor of adjournment?
Could I?
For adjourned, thank you.
Oh, Bill.
Libby wanted to talk.
Libby.
Yes, Libby.
She's got a hand up.
Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, my hand has been up, and I don't want to prolong your meeting. I know you just took a vote to adjourn. I just wanted to be clear, and perhaps we can follow up on the phone regarding this, since the vote, I think the vote was taken to adjourn. When we were talking about the associate member on the planning board, I just wanted everyone to understand that that associate member is provided for in the statute talking about special permits. So the associate member it's Massachusetts general laws provides that you can have an associate member for special permitting decisions. So I just wanted everyone to be clear that that's where the authority comes from to have that associate member appointed. It's in 40A, Section 9. So when you talk about expanding the authority of the associate member, I just want everyone to know that it is limited by state law to special permits.
Well, Libby, is there an ability to have an alternate member that has full voting powers?
That's not provided for in state law, and considering the fact that the authority comes from that special permitting statute, doesn't come from the statute that talks about creation of a planning board. It comes from the special permitting statute that discusses the process for special permits. So the general laws really limits the authority of that. We can look into it and see if it's been expanded before. I don't know if Pat has come across that in her research, but I just didn't want you to end the meeting
No, thank you
being
for that.
under the assumption that the general laws doesn't address
So
it.
thank you
It
for the
does address it.
clarification. Would you look into expanding that to include an alternate with unlimited voting powers?
Yes, you might also ask your counsel. I believe the commission has legal counsel.
Right.
You might also ask your counsel to look at that.
Thank you. I guess that does it. Thank you very much.